All yours.
Are you recording?
Of course.
Fantastic. All right. Hello, guys. The guy who was talking all the time is me, and I wanted to give you a little bit of a presentation about lookdev and specifically how we are working, what it means, and roughly some things that hopefully will benefit you guys as well, just as a general few bits of understanding. But to start from from a very basic point, what we are trying or what our goal is in lookdev is basically to take the model of an asset, the 3D model, take the textures and potentially the groom, if there's any fur or feathers on the asset, and then make something beautiful out of it that kind of hopefully resembles real life as much as possible. So it's kind of like the art of making stuff not gray in the end. And obviously, like in every department, because we are in visual effects, obviously trying to replicate the real life as much as possible. It's always a good idea, just from a very base point of view, to see how light is reacting with different kinds of materials in real life, just to have an understanding from a, and I'm saying very, very simple physics point of view, without going too much into detail, how stuff works. And there are two main categories of surfaces in real life that we are differentiating when we are trying to replicate them in CG. The first one is conductors. So that would be all metals that exist in the real world: silver, gold, iron, steel, these kind of things. And then we have dielectrics, which is pretty much everything else. So plastic, skin, wood, plant material, glass, whatever. Pretty much everything else in a physical sense is considered dielectrics. And for that reason, because it's most of the materials that we are working with, what I'm going to concentrate on today is mainly talking about these kind of materials that we see so often. So I know drawing is perfect. You can ask me for an autograph later. But just as a very, very simple visualization, when we are talking about how light is interacting with media in the real life, if we have light shining on the surface, there for dielectrics, there's two things that can basically happen. The first one is that the light is just passing slightly below the surface and intersecting in the media. And then it reacts with the electrons around and scatters around and gets re-emitted. So part of the light is absorbed and only part of it is reflected again in random directions. And in CG terms, we are calling this effect diffuse. And then the other part that can happen with the light when it hits the surface is that part of the light is not intersecting through the surface, but is reflected directly without reacting with the media at all. And this part of the light usually keeps its incoming color. So if you shine a red light on it, you will get a red reflection of it, and therefore it keeps its incoming polarization as well. And this in CG we are calling specular. So those are the basis of most of the materials that we see in real life. And as you may remember from a good old physics class in school, we always have to make sure that we are conserving the energy. We can never have more energy being reflected from a surface than what is coming in. And I know you all love PowerPoints, but maybe it's also interesting to show it a little bit more in action. And I have a very simple scene here with just a shader ball and some rotating lights around it. And you can see that at the moment, what we're seeing, the surface material on the ball is this bluish diffuse color without any specular on top at the moment. What I can now start doing is I have a simple control here to increase the specular on my surface, and I can start seeing these highlights pop in. So the more I increase the specular here, the more you will see these highlights appearing. And they are very bright in this sense, because even if I'm only reflecting, in this case, 5% of the incoming light as specular, because we are adhering to the real world and lights are very bright in the real world, we see the key lights here as very strong reflections. Now, the more I increase this, and I'll save a quick snapshot of this one, the more I increase this, the specular amount, you will see that at the same time, I'm also decreasing the underlying diffuse. And this is basically what I meant by energy conservation, that the more we have the specular passing through, the less I should have the underlying diffuse. And as you all know, AOV-wise, we can see that reflected in the AOVs here. So in the original one, I have a strong diffuse, and the more I increase the specular, the less of a diffuse I get. Now, if I'm trying to replicate plastic, for example, if you're looking online, there's a lot of data from lots of smart people that measured all of this stuff. You can kind of get that the base reflectance at the frontal angle from plastic is around 4%. And you're looking at this and you're saying like, yeah, it kind of looks like plastic, but something feels a little bit off. And the reason for this is because in the real world, nothing is ever uniform, and we are in CG always trying to adhere to that as well. So one of the things that is not uniform in the real world is how much light is reflected off of a surface, because the amount of light that is diffusely reflected versus specularly reflected is dependent on the viewing angle. And you might have seen this effect before, and I have this wonderful video here of my kitchen board, where if you're looking at it from a frontal angle, you can see, we have very, very dim reflections. You can see the door in the background a little bit because it's bright. But the more we look at it from a glancing angle, the more you see how much the reflectivity increases. And this is something that you can see all across the board in the real world. If you're looking at your kitchen table and you're trying to see if it's dirty, for example, you're not looking at it like straight on, you're looking at it from the side to see more of the reflections and more of the disturbances in the surfaces. And this is something that happens, especially the effect is strong with dielectrics in the real world. And the good thing about this is, because, like I said, there's lots of smart people in the world that are, for some reason, measuring these kind of things. We can see that we have a lot of measured data online. And for all of the dielectrics, they're behaving in an extremely similar way. You can see that here I have some measured data for skin, plastic, and water. And you can see that all of these kind of at the viewing angle, which is the x-axis, up until around 50, 60 degrees, they're kind of having the same amount of reflectance, but then you have a very steep slope as we're going towards the glancing angle, where on the y-axis you can see how much of the incoming light we are reflecting. And you can also replicate this effect in CG. And actually, this is something that we're usually doing by default in our shaders, but in this case, it's off. If I'm using this IOR switch, which is the index of refraction, it's the physical term for measuring this data, you can see that now we have a much more natural effect on this shader ball. It feels a lot more like plastic because as we are going towards these glancing angles, you can see that we are suddenly reflecting a lot more light. And this is, the kind of stuff that you're usually trying to do with light wraps and things like this. But the reason why this is an important effect is because it kind of helps marrying elements together in CG as well. And you can see that the front facing light is kind of the same. The intensity of the speculars of the front facing areas is kind of the same as before, but because we are increasing the reflectivity towards the edges, we get this nice fall off. So now you're sitting there and you're wondering, it's like, really, you're trying to tell me that every single surface is reflecting 100% of incoming light at a theoretical angle of 90 degrees? And you would be surprised because there's people online also, once again, that are taking, for example, images of comparing specular behavior versus diffuse behavior. And with a real camera, you can kind of replicate this effect quite nicely with a polarization filter that basically gives you the ability to filter out whether the polarization of a light has changed once it reaches the camera. And here's some example images that are quite interesting, where you can see, for example, a piece of cardboard that is photographed from the top. And you can see on this top line, we have very little specular, mostly diffuse. And this is the, quote unquote beauty, the actual picture. And the more we look at it from a glancing angle, you can see that the reflections are getting way stronger. And you're thinking, okay, a brick might be pretty diffuse, for example, but even on something like a brick that's a super rough surface, we are getting these very intense specular highlights. And here also, on this theoretical angle of 90 degrees, when we're looking completely flat, in theory, we are reflecting 100% of light, but there's another part of surface irregularities, or another part of non-uniformness, which is surface irregularities. And what I mean by that is, if you have a very rough surface, like this one, it can be, rough on a broad scale, like a piece of brick, for example, or rough on a macroscopic level, if you have, for example, brushed plastic. And when light hits on a surface like that, instead of being reflected with the same angle like a mirror, what you end up with is that each ray, each light ray that hits the surface is kind of disturbed in a slightly different orientation. This is something that we can also replicate in CG with just some test setup that I have here, where I have some noise that I'm using for bump mapping. And for those of you not familiar with the term, it's basically, I can use a noise or an image texture, whatever, to slightly differentiate the normals on my surface so that each incoming ray is reflected in a slightly different appearance, and that it gives this feeling of a bumpy surface. Once I do that, you can see here that I get these nicely broken up highlights. And if I wanted to go more on a microscopic level now, and for example, increase the frequency of my noise, I can make this a little bit smaller, and you can see it gets more and more fine-grained, and I can continue increasing this so that the noise is way below subpixel level, and I get all of these small disturbances in my highlights. The issue with this is that, on some materials, this might be the desired effect that you want to go for. But the problem is that because we are restricted by the power of our computers, we always need to be a little bit wary of obviously trying to give you guys clean images. And the problem with this is that this very small noise if you're using it to break up the highlights, is very, very hard for the renderer to resolve. And it is for this reason that instead of using this, what we have available in our shader as a control usually is something called roughness. And for this, maybe I'll go to a slightly later frame where we are a bit more backlit. So you can see here I have the highlight of my light, which is, pretty bright, and I can start using this roughness control. And what this will do is it will each ray that's coming in will slightly be disturbed and go out in a slightly different direction, but it is almost uniform, and this makes it way easier for the renderer to get a clean image out of it. So I can start increasing this value and get this kind of feeling of microstructure breakup. And I can start getting this way more rough appearance on it. And this is also the part where, if I increase it quite a lot, you can still see that I have a lot of reflectivity on the angles, but now I get it as more of this sheen kind of feeling. And this is not, it's now not just pure diffuse material. We still have the specular on top. It's just giving, if I look at the diffuse, it's this the usual saturated blue, and the kind of feeling that we are getting with this look, if we have a lot of roughness, is more of this, sheen effect that we are getting towards the edges. Right. So, this is the most of the stuff that we are concerned with in a lot of the materials, but simple diffuse and specular is a little bit boring in a lot of cases. So there's more stuff. What I mainly talked about so far is reflectance options. So specular is obviously directly reflecting off of the surface without reacting with the underlying material. But diffuse is, just getting under the surface and then directly scattering out. But we can also have, instead of reflections, we can also have transmittance through the surface. And one thing would be, for example, if light is hitting surface, it can, instead of just going barely under the surface, it can also travel deeper under the surface and scatter around a lot, with the different elements that are internal to the actual material in real life, scatter around. Some of it gets absorbed along the way. Some of it might even come out on the backside if the object is thin enough, and some of it gets out on the top side. And this whole scattering we are calling in CG subsurface scattering. The effect can be seen, for example, on, if you, I'm sure you've seen this before, if you have your hand in front of a very bright light source, you can see part of the light protruding through the thinner layers of your skin. And the same effect is, for example, on candle wax, which is extremely scattery. And also a lot of plants or fruits have this effect where you basically have the light coming from the top side, but you kind of get this feeling of a glow if the light source is strong enough to travel far enough through it. And the second thing that can also happen as part of a transmission through the surface is refractions. And this is light transmitting through the surface, but not necessarily scattering and reacting with the electrons in the media, but just passing through and keeping its incoming polarization. And this is what we call refractions. And good examples of refractions that everyone knows is, for example, glass and water. You can see that the light is passing through, but it doesn't really get disturbed or changing its color when it's going through. There are, tinted glasses and things like this where the color could potentially change, but this is more of a special case that is, not a natural phenomenon. And for this, I'm just gonna go a bit. I'm just gonna go with Freestyle, because we have instead of just having a small template box, I can use the shader that we have available that ships with Arnold directly, which is the renderer that we are using at Trickster. And here, I have my full control. I can say how much diffuse I want to have, how much specular I want to have, and yada yada. But for this one, I want to first have a look at subsurface scattering. And I have, simple sliders for most things that are pretty straightforward, where I can basically say I want either 0 subsurface and 100% diffuse, or I want 100% subsurface and 0% diffuse. And you can see already as soon as I bump this up, hope that it doesn't crash, that I now suddenly get this very scattery feeling. And everyone's telling you always, oh yeah, everything is super physically correct and blah, blah, blah. If I'm actually setting my subsurface color to the same value as my diffuse color, and I'm not letting it scatter through at all, then I basically get the exact same result as if I was to use simple diffuse material. It's a lot more noisy. But the main control of for the subsurface scattering is how far you want the light to go through the surface. So I can start playing around with this scale control, and you will start to see that getting this feeling of light going through the surface here. And this is it's a very nice effect that we can use on a lot of softer materials like human skin and things like this, to get this feeling of light penetrating through the object and scattering around in diffuse manner. We can also control the color as the light is passing through. So if I, for example, make this an extreme case where I have only red light going through the surface, I can see that in my red channel, I have the scattering happening, and in the green and blue, it kind of looks exactly like the diffuse. And so the only wavelengths that are scattering through the surface in this case would be the red light. And I can get this kind of a effect from it. There's a lot of options that we can play around, and it's very particular to the object that we are shading. But a very common pitfall is to basically, for example, on digidoubles, because everyone is very, very used to human skin. We exactly know when something's off, even if we cannot tell directly what is off. We usually can feel if something's off. And one of the big things that usually we get wrong in CG is trying to make everything on human skin too scattery. And this is it's quite a common pitfall, and it's something that can easily make digital humans look quite off. Apart from subsurface scattering, what we also have is, as I mentioned earlier, refractions. I'll just quickly get my roughness down. And as soon as I enable this, you can see that I start having this very glass-like feeling immediately. With refractions, we can basically have a couple of controls as well to basically say how much or how strong the light is refracted. And this is once again with the IOR control that works the same as for specular. If I'm setting this to a value of 1, I basically get all the light going directly through without it being disturbed by the surface. And the more I increase this value, the more I will eventually start introducing these distortions in the surface. I can also change a couple of special things. that we have control over something that you see oftentimes in the real world is that especially towards the edges of glassy surfaces, for example, the light isn't refracted equally in all wavelengths, but kind of gets this prism split effect. And this is something that we can replicate as well, where, you know, we're not really doing a physical split, but we can split up the light in the RGB components and slightly refract it in different ways. And then on some of the extreme angles, you can see you get this nice prism sort of effect coming in. And other than that, maybe what's interesting to know is that with refractions, we can also make use of roughness as well. So if we, for example, wanted to have something that you oftentimes have in bathroom windows, these like frosted windows, we can replicate this effect also by introducing roughness to our shader, which makes the light more blurry as it passes through the surface. As we can see kind of here. And as you can see, obviously, this kind of stuff, I'm showing it on a very simple object, but you can see it's already struggling a little bit with getting nice result. But this is the price we have to pay with our computers for beautiful images. The main thing that I was showing so far is, you know, I'm looking at simple shader and some of the main controls. However, the thing is that in CG, oftentimes we don't just do blue or gray spheres, but we are actually trying to replicate materials from the real world. And we have different ways of introducing complexity to the material, because, you know, single material is hardly uniform across the surface, as I mentioned before, and you have different levels of breakup. And for this, we usually have very, very strong interaction with the texturing guys, who are providing us flat textures that we can use for our shaders. I think I have a set of textures available here. So for example, I have some textures from a concrete material. So I have a simple color available. I do have also 2 additional maps available. One of them is a roughness map, which I can use instead of having a uniform roughness value that uniformly diverts the reflections of my surface. I can also have a map instead of having a 0 to 1 slider to map these 2 different surface roughnesses. And I, for example, also have a displacement map that tells me how much I want the surface to be offset from its original point. In this case, starting from 0.5 position. So what I can do is I can connect all of these up to my shader. So I'm just going to use the base color here. I'm going to plug the roughness map into my specular roughness, and I'm going to use the displacement as my displacement. And then give it another go. And what you will start to see is that I suddenly get the feeling of concrete material. Now, here comes the part of where things might get a little bit tricky to realize, and a lot of things of how to create realistic materials is just observation from the real world. So, you know, I have a nice starting point with this, and I might get a nice feeling of saying, yeah, basically, you know, it looks more or less like some sort of a concrete stony material. And the good thing about this is that we do not necessarily, for every single texture change, we don't need to necessarily go back into texturing, having them export the textures again, because this can potentially be a very lengthy process. But very, very similar to the way that you guys are working in Nuke, for example. We also have, for example, color corrects available. So I can, as an example, change the do some color correction on my texture here. I can say, I don't know, if I wanted to change the gamma, I can see that directly being reflected in the actual render. And likewise, if I, for example, wanted to do some adjustments to my roughness map, I can do it in a very similar way. One thing that personally I like to use is curves, similar to Photoshop or color lookup tool in Nuke, where I can have very precise control over my maps. And let's say, for example, I'm going to a later frame here. We have a bit more backlight and obviously more specular. And let's say, you know, it looks kind of cool, but I want to have this a little bit wetter feeling. I can do a correction on my roughness map to basically, for example, give it a little bit more contrast. And I can start getting this feeling of a bit more wet specular on top here. And this is something, you know, I can either control by just interactively rendering and observing the beauty or the corresponding AOVs, or I could also at the same time, for example, plug this directly in my output, or output the texture itself as an AOV, so that I can see my corrections always in context. But a lot of the look deving process is basically taking textures. In this case, you know, it's a very simple example, but we might have, for example, ID maps that define dirty areas, for example, where we want to start introducing moss or dirt or dust on top of the surface and these kind of things. So it's a lot of interoperability between texturing and the look dev department if we are working on an asset together. However, you know, not just plugging textures in is not something that we just do all day, because that would be easy enough. A lot of the times, what we are getting as well is specific requests from the clients, for example, that they want to have things like iridescence, for example, or any sort of special shading effects that are not really possible to emulate in an easy manner with the base set of shaders that we have available. So in these kind of situations, what I can do is, and Alexei spoiled it to me a little bit before, because you mentioned that you had a look at iridescence the other day, but I'm going to show it anyway, because I had a look through it yesterday and it kind of worked. What I can do, for example, is I have utility shading nodes available that can output me a lot of data that I'm getting from either from the mesh or from the lights in my scene. One of these things, for example, here I can see I'm getting a basic phasing ratio. I can also, for example, get the Lambertian response, basically a diffuse response of my shader. But the good thing about this is that it's outputting RGB values. So what I can do with this is I have a lot of control to, sorry, it's a little bit laggy with VNC active. I have a lot of control to do post-processing on the actual shader. And I think for this, I need to disable this guy. Here we go. So for example, I could go in and invert my light response, for example, and basically have complete creative control over the modifications that I'm doing with this light that I'm outputting from this utility shader. So one thing that I can do is, as we have ramps, for example, available, I can convert this into, I can specify that instead of using this as RGB data, I can, for example, replicate an iridescence effect. And for those of you that maybe weren't there earlier, iridescence is basically this effect that you oftentimes see when you have shimmering oil on the streets. Is these very colorful reflections that are also changing if you're looking at it from a different point of view, or if you're shining light on it. It's kind of has this appearance of changing the color. What I can do is I can, for example, use my the original ramp that I had. And as it's just, in this case, simple black and white, I can convert it to RGB and just set green and blue to 1. And in this case, what I'll get out of it is exactly as you would expect. I have a ramp in my red channel that adjusts based on where my light is in the scene. And in the green and the blue channel, I have a constant value of 1. And what I can now do is, if I'm thinking in HSV space, instead of having red, green, and blue, I can treat this as hue, saturation, and value. And my hue range, I know every app uses it a little bit differently, but usually in floating point DCCs, you have a hue range from 0 to 1 to cycle through the whole hue spectrum. And in this case, I can, for example, do a color conversion, exactly like the color space node in Nuke, and convert this from, or specify that my incoming source is HSV and my outgoing data is RGB. So they just have a hue ramp, saturation, and value at 1. And what I will get out of it is a funky hue ramp that is changing as my light is rotating around. I get different kinds of colors. And now you could say, it looks okay, funky, fair enough, but you might want to introduce a little bit of variance to it, because at the moment it's very uniform. But the good thing is, because this is all procedurally generated, instead of just having a simple ramp in the beginning here for my light, what I can do is I can just map the color of this utility node. I can map it with a noise, for example, instead of having a plain white color. So you can just bear with me, add a noise to the whole thing. And then let's say I want to make it, maybe not that small scale, and distort it a little bit, so that now I have a little bit of variance across my surface. And when I look back at the final result of this, you will see that now I have this kind of almost oily looking thing. And you can, you could go in and distort this also based on other parameters and things like this, but then we would run a little bit out of time. But the basis is that what I can do is, now that I created this map procedurally, and I have a lot of control over it inside of the shader, what I can do is I can, not in the base color, but use this as my specular color, for example. Ching. And then give it a second to refresh. And what you will see coming out at the end of it, if I maybe make my diffuse a little bit darker, you can kind of see that I start having this feeling of this oily kind of surface here that is also changing when I move the light around. Like so. And then you might say, okay, maybe this is a little bit too psychedelic. You can, because like I said, this is completely procedural. So we can easily, for example, reduce our base saturation that we set in the beginning to maybe not go so overboard with it. And then, you know, if you want, I can also show a couple of different things, but I thought that this is maybe some more or less useful things for you guys as well. And if you have any questions, you can scream them in the microphone now, if you didn't fall asleep yet.
Julius,
I have a question.
Also, yeah, but Yuri, you can go first. Go first.
Well, you can go, Ruth. I go after.
Okay. I just had a question. So all the controls you're getting, is this something that you make, or is this coming from whatever Mari or Substance that whoever the texture artist made, or how does that workflow?
It really depends. If you're talking about the actual nodes themselves, like the shader node that we have available, large part of it is shipping with the renderer. And the renderer, maybe I should have explained that a little bit as well, is somehow we need to get this 3D GL representation to output a pixel in the end. And that's what the renderer is responsible for, to do all of the light calculation. And that one is, in our case, we're using Arnold, and that one is shipping with a base set of shader and utility nodes. But the good thing is that you can, it's also relatively open. So you can also write some of these utility nodes yourself if there's a special need for it. And then,
but for example, like if we had like let's say like a brick road or something like that, so someone textures this road, is the texture artist giving you like telling you how rough that surface is, or is that then something that you do on your
usually the good thing about texturing is that they have quite a good representation in Mari or in Substance already in the viewport already. So if they are, for example, most of the time they will, for example, paint the roughness map as well, and displacement and bump and all of these things. So they kind of get a preview of it already, how it's going to look in the shader eventually as well. And so they are, trying to dial the values in as much as possible for them to see it interactively in the viewport. But then to define, the final adjustments and maybe layering different components, that's usually what we are doing. Because you might have situations of like, let's say you have a base texture, and on top of this, in some of the crevices, you might need some dirt or moss, for example. Usually what they would do is they would paint one full texture for the bricks, let's say, and then one full texture for the moss and for the dirt areas over the whole surface, give us a mask to blend between them, and then we can control the surface qualities between those two different materials individually, and do, if then the VFX supervisor is saying, oh, we want a little bit more moss here or less moss there and stuff like this, we can dial this in because we have all of these options to do any sort of overrides as well in shading.
Okay, cool. Okay.
But yeah, it's always usually a bit back and forth.
Okay. My question would be, so when you are using textures and like it's between, my question is between energy conservation and high dynamic range textures. So for example, if you are reflecting an image that has an high value, like at 15, okay, and you're using a light, like a point light, and it has a his higher value is 10. So the energy of the point light is 10. Then you are reflecting the image. on a sphere, let's say, but the sphere is reflecting something like a texture that has an higher value than the light itself. So what's happening? How is Katana dealing with this?
There's a very very important notion to differentiate between surface materials that are reacting to incoming lights and the lights themselves. Lights themselves, in a physical sense, is something that is actually emitting, or so to speak, producing lights. So, for example, what we are trying to do is, I have these two lights here in our default studio setup. What these are doing is that they emit light based on more or less values that we get from the set. In this case, so they are very, very bright because they are emitting light. When they hit the surface, because they are so bright, they obviously, in the sense of diffuse, it's very easy to understand, because it's just a multiplication, so to speak, of the. Okay, this one is. The TX files are clamped, unfortunately, so I cannot show it. But if I'm just looking at the base diffuse material, if I have this with a diffuse color of 1, and I would increase the intensity of my light, it's just a simple multiplication. So if I for example, make my softbox twice as bright. I will the result will also be twice as bright. The thing is, I will never. What I mean by energy conservation is that all of the different layers that are on the material, diffuse, specular, transmission, and subsurface, that they will never exhibit the incoming intensity. And the thing is, I can easily, in theory, break this. So this is something that artists need to be aware of. I could set, basically 0 means I'm reflecting 0 of the light. So in this case, I would get no diffuse. I'll maybe turn off the specular as well, just to showcase it a little bit better. So now in this case, it would be a black hole, so to speak. But what I could in theory also do is I could set the intensity to 10 here, and now it will reflect 10 times more light than is incoming.
Okay.
Exactly. So in theory, I can easily break this. So this is also something you can easily, that's easily checkable in the albedos, for example. If I'm sampling the color of my diffuse albedo, in this case it's 10. So anything that is incoming light will be reflected 10 times stronger going out, which is obviously.
Okay, so if I'm reflecting a texture that is brighter than the light itself, then it's gonna break, basically.
Exactly. The textures, albedo textures, always need to be in a 0 to 1 space to make exactly sure for that. And even if it's things like roughness, most of these are normalized between 0 and 1 range, so it's easier for artists to control what's a legal range for those inputs.
Got it. Okay. So all the textures, all the reflective textures, apart from image-based light textures, probably they have to be from between 0 and 1.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it.
Hi. I have a question regarding the IORs, because often, when you're working with trying to set this correctly, you get multiple options. You get like a simple option. You can have an option, I don't know, called Metalness. Then there will be more complex IOR, for example, where you have it in RGB plus an absorption coefficient. And I'm wondering a little bit about, first of all, when to use what, and also this absorption coefficient. What is it for, and how does it actually relate to the so-called IOR?
Yeah, it's a very good question that I exactly didn't cover because it's only for metals, and it might take a little bit of time, but I'll try to go through it quickly. As you correctly mentioned, we have in the case of Arnold, for example, it gives you a metalness control, which basically says, okay, instead of having a diffuse base color, it is now quote unquote a metal, and I can treat it this way. What it does internally, or how metals are working in the real life, as you correctly mentioned, is that we don't only have this simple IOR value, but we also have the extinction coefficient, which is for dielectrics is always 0. It's a physical way of measuring, as far as I know, how much light gets converted into electricity. But don't quote me on that. What you can look for online, on refractiveindex.info or whatever, you will always see that for metals, depending on different wavelengths, you have different values in RGB for the IOR and for the extinction coefficient. The biggest problem with this, in my opinion, is that it's not very artist friendly. So you can get, in theory, the exact values for copper, for example, the IOR for all wavelengths and the extinction coefficient for all wavelengths. But the problem is that usually you show this to the VFX supervisor and they are saying, yeah, it looks cool, but I want to have it more orange, for example. And then you get into a very big problem because these K values or the extinction coefficient usually have very weird numbers like 3 or 4 or 0.25 and things like this that are all over the place. So they are not really mappable. And they are also not easy to tweak if you need to make changes. Yes, very, very good point, Marco. So yes, we're not quite doing spectral rendering yet. So only working with RGB values in this case. In my experience as well, you don't always get how it actually looks in the real world, especially now working in ACCG. The colors are usually a little bit distorted. So long story short, what a lot of shader developers are doing is they give you this metal slider where you can basically directly define a base color. So the actual color that is going to be reflected, and you can still tweak the specular color on top of it to get on the edges the desired effect. So, and in my opinion, this works a little bit better because you can visually exactly match to a reference.
Yeah, okay. So, no, actually, that actually answered my question. Thanks.
Okay.
Hi. I have just one question about these reflection thing, what you explained in the beginning with noise, when you're breaking up the reflection to make it softer. Is there a difference in optical, or is it very much the same?
It's pretty much the same thing. Sorry, I think I'm hearing my echo now on you.
I'm sorry.
Quickly. No worries. It's a very similar thing. The only difference is that in theory I have a bit more control to change my reflections. So there are oftentimes, situations where you might want to have a very particular effect, on some kind of jewelry. You oftentimes have this effect of like just slightly glittering kind of highlights, and for this it can be quite useful to, for example, have these smaller scale noisy breakups. But a lot of the time when we are trying to replicate materials in the real world, we get more of a it usually works a little bit better if we use roughness for that instead, because we can still map that with different values via a texture in the end, and it gives us more control most of the time over the shapes of the highlights. But like I said, for certain kinds of glittery effects, it might be easier to do this with noisy breakup. But you can see with roughness, we're getting very smooth specular highlights. And if we're breaking it up with noise, we get this kind of glittery stuff. It was more as an illustration purpose.
Hello. So my question would be, you mentioned that there's 100% reflectivity at 90% angles or glancing angles. And then you talked about roughness. Does the roughness go down at glancing angles as well? Because I have the feeling that it does.
Yes. It does. There's actually an interesting point about it, because if you and this is in part already to a degree. I think some shaders are already implementing this. But let's say you have, and I'm sorry, I'm drawing with my mouse. Let's say you have a rough surface, and you're looking at it from the top. So, imagine you're looking from here, and you're looking straight down on the rough surface. There's a very high chance that you are looking into crevices or peaks and all of this all the time. But if you are looking from the side, you have a much higher chance, the more that you're going into this theoretical angle of 90 degrees, you have a much higher chance of just looking at the peaks and not so much of the valleys, and therefore in theory the roughness is also reduced on a lot of surfaces in the real world. At least I don't have any actual physical explanation on this, but there's a lot of materials that just seem slightly rough. Like I had my own phone cover. If you're looking at it from an angle, it seems a lot less rough. You can replicate this effect also in shading. If you're taking a facing ratio that always is dependent on your camera, you can reduce the roughness towards the edges slightly as well. And sometimes that's a desired effect, but most of the time the
so it doesn't do it by itself in Arnold?
Not that I know. No. At least I think visually it kind of does it to a degree because of the GGX shape when you're looking at it from an angle, but you don't really have much of a control about it.
All right.
Time's out. 10 o'clock.
Made it on time.
Yeah, you made it exactly on time. Okay, then Julius, huge thanks.
I have one last question.
You can, Yuri, can stay with Julius. I have to jump out, and you guys, whoever want to stay, please stay. Clover, we need to start our morning meeting. Then that's why.
Julius, it was amazing. It was really good. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually,
Thank you. Thank you.
Guys,
Thank you.
I'm closing this because actually meeting is in my room, so I will have to cut the workshop. Okay, sorry.
Right, see ya.
Thanks, Julius. Ciao.
Yeah.